Three, two, one.
Well, what's going on, Metaverse Church podcast friends? It is so good to see you or to be in your eardrums yet once again, whether you are listening via podcast or you're watching us on YouTube, which, by the way, I just want to start off by saying thank you so much to those of you who have been subscribing to the podcast and to the YouTube channel. Those of you who are even communicating with us. Like, it's so awesome. It's fun to be building a community around just this thing called Metaverse Church. So thank you to all of you. Hey, so we're coming at you with a bonus episode this Monday morning, because if you haven't heard, if you play around in the metaverse world, and especially if you play around in the VR world, you probably heard the big news that altspace VR is shutting its doors as of March 10th. And so what that means for you, and what that really means for Goose and myself, is God's got a funny sense of humor, because we dropped episode 2, which was all about a deep dive into altspace, and all of a sudden episode 2 became irrelevant at this point because everybody is jumping ship right now. So we are bringing you a bonus episode, just really talking about the fact that altspace is shutting down and what we think that means, what we are doing, as Cornerstones, as Lakeland VR, what we're hearing, all that kind of stuff. So, Goose, man, I'm going to throw it right over to you, because you've been playing around in the world a lot longer than I have. That was campus launch 1 for you guys, right? Just straight into
Correct.
altspace.
Yep.
Yeah. So what's going on with you guys? What are you hearing? What are you thinking? What's going on?
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily completely out of left field. We're certainly disappointed, and there's grieving with our people. But we're sort of, there's 2 aspects to this, just pastorally. One is, like I said, it's kind of caring for our people, and for the people who are in the metaverse, they'll understand what that means. For people not in the metaverse, it may sound kind of strange to think about grieving an app shutting down. But it's more about the community there and what's going to happen that people are worried about than it is just, this app isn't available anymore. And so managing that is one big chunk of what we've been doing. And then the second part of it is figuring out where God is leading us. Like you said, God's got a good sense of humor, but if he's allowing this to shut down with all the ministry that's been happening in there, if he's shutting this down, that can only mean that he's got something bigger and better for us in the future. And so, the message that I gave my team is look, we grieve. There is grief, and that's appropriate here, but we don't grieve the way the world grieves. And usually that's in the context of losing someone. But it's totally applicable here. And we don't grieve the way the world grieves because we have hope. We can have grief and optimism at the same time, and they're not mutually exclusive. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah. Nope. If I were to hang on to that word grief, man, I think that is so accurate. So the news dropped Friday, this past Friday, whatever date that was, would be January 19th, I guess. And so I quickly moved, I put on my headset and I hopped into altspace, and I hopped into really a lot of the other platforms, just because now for us, it's okay, let's make a quick shift. Like, we got to figure out, what does it mean to do Lakeland VR and all the other VR platforms? And here was the thing that was interesting to me when I got into altspace. I logged into altspace, and the very first thing that I noticed was the local community hub of altspace, Campfire, was packed.
Yeah.
I mean, packed. So normally if I log on, we're talking about like 9-10 people are in that environment, tops. Sometimes I'll see 20 plus in there, but that's very rare that I see that. But 49-50 people were in there, and there was a constant influx of like some coming in, some going out, but it was a pretty steady like 49. My guess is that means that they had front row open, and they had mirror images of what's going on, and even more numbers than that was actually in there for that event. But so knowing what everybody was going to be talking about, I got in there and I was like, I'm keeping my mic off and I just want to bounce around to all the little huddle groups that were going on. And I would just want to hear what everybody's saying. And of course, the biggest conversation was, okay, Allspace is shutting down. So where are you going? Where are you going? So these are people who have built community with others in Allspace are asking each other, how are we going to find each other in the next platform that we go to? And what was super amazing just to listen and hear was exactly that word that you threw out, grief. There was so much grief that was going on over this platform shutting down that I've been telling people I felt like I walked into a funeral,
Yeah.
and just all the people coming to mourn the loss of a great friend. And just the conversations were just amazing because here's what it is. So like you said, it might sound weird to somebody who doesn't play in this realm, that somebody might be grieving over the loss of an app like this, but it's the investment that people have already put into this platform. So like we've already talked about before, how we as Lakeland, like we hired you to build a world for us, right? And so when I started hearing the rumors, and you and I've already been talking about this, because the rumors really came, like I would probably say the rumors surfaced probably about 2-3 weeks ago, about the
Yeah.
time that we even launched this podcast. So you and I have been talking about this off air about, hey, what does this mean? And so Lakeland does this investment of hiring you to build a world for us. So we've got funds that's invested into this. And it's just like, oh, dang, dude. So what happens to this world that we built? And that's really a lot of what I was hearing some other people talk about within altspace as well. Is just this one lady was talking about how she knows somebody who created a world, that was just an like it was honoring his deceased wife. So there's
Yeah.
photos, there's memories, like all this kind of stuff that's in there that this dude has put blood, sweat, and tears into as just a shrine of a memory for his deceased wife. That once Altspace shuts its doors in 6 weeks, that's gone. Like he
Yeah.
doesn't have that anymore. And there's guys like you've put a lot of effort into building different worlds. There's guys like DJ Soda, VR Tiger, that like they've put in a whole bunch of time
Yeah.
in developing these biblical worlds or these teaching worlds, that were all done in app. So not in Unity where you build our world, but done in app, that as soon as Altspace shuts down, it's gone. It's
Yeah.
lost forever. And it almost feels like, man, what a waste at this point. And so I totally get it when people are grieving over this platform shutting down, because there's a lot that is about to be lost really for a while. So I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that, again, it's hard not to think pastorally about some of this, and on the practical side, we're really fortunate that uh, Lakeland will be able to use all of that. Everything, almost nothing will be lost.
Yeah.
Having built in Unity, and so that is just a fortunate thing. Um, there is a sort of message in this, though, that VR so much, to me, VR so much mimics life itself, our lives outside of VR, with respect to eternity, right? And everything is going that you talk about is going to be lost just like that, and like that's the message that we're trying to get to people in everywhere, which is like, look at all the effort you put into this stuff. And it's not nothing. Like, Jesus wouldn't have come and walked the earth if it wasn't important. So it is important, but it's not the final thing. And so there is a sort of lesson here. It's like, hey, you see all that? You see this, like how you're feeling about how like it's all going to be gone like that. Well, guess what? Like, that's what life is. That's life. Here it
Yeah.
is. So think about it appropriately, because in a second, it'll be all gone. And so anyway, yeah, so that's just sort of the spiritual side of it. Is there is a sort of a lesson in here that we can kind of take away from that. Practically speaking, where everyone is going, there's been some very interesting conversations. I'd love to hear where you're at. I know on our side, the ones that have popped up almost as more as shooting from the hip than I think actually thought through are VR Chat and Horizons, and that's natural to think in those ways. They're probably the closest. Since I'll tell you where we're at, and I'm kind of curious what you've heard. I think VR Chat is where most people are going to end up because it's the closest. It's just very different. It has always been very different from a conceptual standpoint. For altspace users, Horizons is closer in terms of theme. The biggest problem that I've seen with Horizons is in terms of making the jump. I actually think Horizons has a lot of potential. It's not there yet, but it's got a lot of potential. And I don't know if this is your experience. I'm kind of curious because we've never really talked about this particular nuance of altspace and VR Chat. Is how many desktop users we have. So there are a ton of people that we have that, and key people as well, that that actually don't go in VR. I mean, they do sometimes, but many of them are primarily using the desktop client and not going in VR. And Horizons does not offer that. So when that came up as, hey, where do we go with this? Horizons is not a one-to-one match for altspace, mainly because of that reason. And so, yeah, what are you hearing? What's the bulk of where are the bulk of the people going to go?
Yeah. So I'm hearing VR chat, and I think that's pretty much almost a gimme at this point. Like it's the big dog on the market, in my opinion. When something great comes to an end, where are you gonna go? Where are you gonna turn to at that point? Well, you're gonna turn to what has a strong foundation and a strong following. So
Yeah.
that's what everybody's talking about. It's what I've heard. VR chat. In fact, one of the things that was brought up when I was in Campfire on Friday was one of the guys was talking about. How there is a campfire world that somebody developed in VR chat. And ironically enough, I was just in it the week before when he mentioned it, that somebody recreated campfire the way
Yeah.
that we know in altspace in VR chat, in the VR chat style as well. So it's similar, what you're walking into, but it's got that VR chat feel to it as well, and even components to it. Like even some of the interactables that altspace have, they have some of those same interactables
No
within
way.
VR chat.
That's
So it's
cool.
just that's the reason why I say it. That's everybody's already talking about VR chat is where they're going next. What's interesting is we talked about in the past 2 episodes the deep dive into altspace and the deep dive into VR chat. And in those conversations, we talk about the demographic of the user between those two platforms, right? And so, what I'm curious about is the older demographic that we have talked about that's in alt space. How long are they actually going to play in VR chat? That is younger in its demographic, as we've talked about. That's the one where I'm just kind of like, man, I am so curious. How long do those people stay around for? But it's VR chat. It's Horizons. Um, we as Lakeland, the easiest pivot for us right now is to move into big screen. Um, like literally, there's only one event that we run in alt space that can't be duplicated or replicated in big screen. So I'm already talking to my group leader that runs that one, and I've already pitched the idea to her of like, I think this is where we capitalize on what you're doing, and let's head over to Horizons and let you kind of be our foot in the door on that side of things. But if we had to, if Altspace would have decided we're shutting down as a Sunday,
Yeah.
and I had to pivot all of our events from that we host in Altspace to big screen, we could do it. The biggest
Yeah.
learning curve is teaching my team how to run and operate in there. So
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Yeah, for us, I mean, VR chat is doing we're doing well there. The community is growing, both numbers, which we tend not to try and focus on, but spiritually that it is developing. And so yeah, for us, it's not the most of our work is on the just caring for the people side. And so we're fortunate that I don't think this is going to impact our ministry as much as it's going to impact some others. Um, but we are talking now about, okay, well, what does that mean? I mean, March 10th, all of a sudden, March 17th, we're freed up during that time. And so it's like, well, what do we do? And so, and that's where sort of the optimism for us comes, which is, okay, God, like, it's a little scary, and we're kind of like, we want to make the right decision, but whatever else is out there, it's going to be awesome. So, let's go. So yeah, we don't know yet. We tried Rec Room for a little bit. We kind of soft launched and tested the waters there, and it didn't. It was cool, and I liked it. We weren't ready for it. It wasn't the right time. So we may kick the tires on that again. I do think Horizons is probably a place we'll start, fiddling around with as well. But we all sort of decided, hey, look, let's just take a step back, pray about it, and then we'll see what the Lord reveals to us.
Yeah. I was telling a mutual friend that we have, Jeff Reed, over at the Church.Digital. I said, what's interesting for me right now is I walked into 2023 already feeling this drive and this conviction. I say it's a Holy Spirit conviction of just really investigating the other platforms for us as Lakeland. We took the week after Christmas off as a staff. We work differently. And during that week, I was just really, that week and the week after, I just really started diving into what are the numbers right now in VR users as a whole across the world in the US? What's the demographic of it and whatnot? I wanted to understand that a little bit more. And one of the things that I was reading as I was researching that was that there were 63 million users in the US alone, right? Wow. And 2/3 of those users are guys. Guys don't typically go to church, statistically speaking. So I was like, okay, so there's a lot of dudes that are playing around in virtual reality. And so if dudes aren't going to come into the church, then maybe the church should go to where the guys are at. And as I was thinking about that, I was like, but as I process that, there's not that many users. There's not 63 million users that are in altspace. And so that's where I started doing my deep dive into some of the other platforms and trying to think like, okay, if this isn't where everybody's at, where is everybody at? And even if I were to combine all of the ones that we're going to be doing deep dives on, it still doesn't equate out to 63 million users, which means that they're all still out there someplace else. And I think like you and I haven't talked about this on this podcast yet, but I'm curious, in your opinion, what's going to be the role of small groups in building up a VR metaverse church when it comes to like you lead a Bible study in Pop One. Like that's a whole new field. Like, when you do that, and again, we'll eventually talk about this because I'm fascinated by you doing this and it's something that I'm about to start playing around in, but when you do a small group in Pop One, do you end up building a friends list and then inviting those friends lists of people you've connected with to join you for service in altspace or VR chat? Join the Discord? Yeah.
That's something that when we get to that point, we can really dig into it. I think that's it. I've long thought that the framework that I've sort of mapped out for metaverse ministry is really raising up someone in every place. And when we talk about a place, it's an app, it's a game, whatever it may be. And so having, so Pop One is a great example of that. And it's very much like a grassroots approach to ministry, which is just getting into a place and saying, you know what, none of these can support a massive amount of people. There's no real framework that works. If you were to map it out on paper and say, we're going to go into this place and at one time we're going to have 1,000 people and pack 1,000 people in. It just doesn't work that way. Not really. And so it's all very grassroots. It's all very micro. in the sense
Yeah.
of ministry, and it's beautiful. I mean, so I sort of envision this idea of looking at a church, and it's like, a church where you've got your people in all of these places, and the idea is not, go bring in 1,000 people. It's go meet a person and see if the Lord is leading them in, and go meet another and go meet another. And if you've got, 8, 10 at a time, like, in Pop One, that's, I mean, the most we ever had in there maybe was like 20 people in a lobby. And it was packed, and it like felt packed. That felt massive. But if you were doing that at a church and you're having a whole service or something like 20 people, it's like, okay, like that's not where you want to stay. That's not what you would think it would be the max. So anyway, the point is, there's just, as you're pointing out, if there's 63 million people in VR, where are they? Well, they're everywhere. They're just scattered. And so finding the people who can go in and are willing to pour themselves out for the gospel for the one, as opposed to trying to pull in massive amounts of people, I think that's going to be the way that this really starts to gel and crystallize. And we look at it and be like, oh, that's what metaverse ministry is. And by the way, it just so happens that, I mean, absent things like Pentecost, it happens to be really the way that the Acts Church was sort of, growing. They grew daily, right? And it wasn't, so anyway, all that to say, I think you really tapped to something there. Probably better for another episode before we go too far down that rabbit hole. But definitely think that's where it's at.
Yeah. So we'll wrap up this bonus episode with this, and I'll give you any final closing thoughts that you have. But so this morning, so I'm at the church right now. So this is actually this room that I'm in. This is our physical church building, and I'm in our digital ministry room. So on Sunday mornings, I sit in here with my headset on. And then we've got 2 chat hosts that are in here for our live stream services, just chatting with people and whatnot. But this morning, as I was getting ready to come in, I all of a sudden had this mindset. I had this thought pop into my head. It's like, isn't it interesting how if you trace back the movement of God and how he reaches people, it's very, very similar. Like, God changes not, right? The Bible says he's the same today, yesterday, and forever. And I was thinking about this. I was like, man, when you read Genesis, God said to Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. Well, one of the biggest issues that happened was this disobedience of not really filling the earth. They stayed in their little huddle groups around each other. And then all of a sudden you have the flood, and God says, fill the earth. And Noah and his family and that community, after the waters receded, stayed with each other. And to the point that you get Babel, the Tower of Babel, where these people working together are like, dude, we're going to reach to the heavens. So God confuses their language, which then spreads them out all over the place, right? Pentecost, and you just mentioned it. And this is really where my head went to this morning. I got asked how many churches are in altspace the other day, and I said, Matt, a mutual friend of ours, Cheddar's, he's got a wiki page going, and it's got 15 churches on that list that are in altspace right now, and I'm pretty sure it's more than that. But I said, if I were to do like a rough guesstimate, I would say 20 plus. But how many churches are in Rec Room? How many churches are in VR Chat? How many churches are in Horizons? Not many. And the thought that went through my head today was, dude, Jesus resurrects and he says, go into the world and make disciples. And the disciples, after being commissioned to go into the world and make disciples, they locked themselves up in the upper room in fear of this persecution, that they would meet the same fate that Jesus did, right? They're trembling in fear. Pentecost happens and the Holy Spirit fills them. And all of a sudden now there's this supernatural boldness that comes into their lives. And guess what? The persecution of the church begins to happen. And what ends up happening is they are forced out of Jerusalem and into Judea and into Samaria and into the ends of the world. And I was like, How interesting will it be now to
Yeah.
see altspace shutting down, where the church, the capital C church and the lower C expressions of the churches have become so comfortable and used to doing ministry here, while the ocean was much bigger outside of just altspace, that God is saying, all right, enough's enough. I don't
Yeah.
need you guys to saturate altspace. I need you to make disciples, and they're not all here. So now it's time to go forth and do this. And I was just like,
It's not
when
bad.
we're not being obedient to what God is calling us to do, God will force his hand because he
Yeah.
loves the world so much. So that went through my head today. I was like, and so I've been talking with other people, and a lot of them, we started this by saying there's talk of grief, like people grieving, and that's absolutely true. But as you said, but we don't grieve as others do because we have hope. And I've been telling people all day today in VR and across platforms, I'm like, dude, I'm so excited for what's next. Like, we were already kicking the tires on some of the other platforms, and
Yeah.
now we have no choice but to just dive in. And we might stink at it, but we're going to learn and we're going to grow. And that's exactly what happened when we went into altspace. And in the process, we're going to end up meeting people that we wouldn't have met otherwise, who are going to catch vision, they're going to catch fire, and they're going to be disciples who end up making disciples, all because we were forced into other platforms. And on top of that, talking about the micro style of doing church, what this really forces our hand to do is find the person of peace per platform that we could say, dude, we just want to love people well, and we want to introduce them to Jesus in the process. You've got a heart for Horizons, you have a heart for big screen, you have a heart for VR chat. Like, do you want to do this? And it's just more of us releasing with support to go be a light in dark places, go be a light to people, go shed hope. So yeah, so I'm excited. So
I love it. I
that's what
mean,
processed through my mind. Final thoughts to you?
yeah, no, that's man, I can't do better than that. That's powerful. I had not thought of it in that way, but I totally agree. It's going to be exciting to see what the churches that have, and especially now that there's been that learning process, and in one platform, taking that elsewhere. That's going to be pretty exciting. Yeah.
Sweet. All right, so that's it for this bonus episode of the Metaverse Church podcast. We will come back at you later on this week as we continue on in our series of deep dives into other platforms, which, hey, episode 2 may already be irrelevant, but all the ones coming after that are going to be super relevant for you and your church as you look at getting into this. If you have any questions for Goose or myself, you can reach out to us at the at metaversechurchpodcast@gmail.com, or you can hop into our Discord channels. We would love to connect with you there as well. Please subscribe to this. Again, thank you for all of our subscribers so far. Leave a rating and review. That helps get this out to more people. So until then, we will see you on Friday for our next episode. Be blessed.